All right. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody from the School Governance Network, and welcome to today's webinar on financial management during uncertain times. The School Governance Network is a collaboration between myself, Michael Iannini, Managing Director of PD Academia and a Council of International Schools affiliated consultant, and Paul Smith, founder and CEO of Future Directors Institute. Unfortunately, Paul's not able to join us today because he is working with the Jane Goodall Foundation in their own board meeting. But I am very fortunate to be joined by Russell Cooke, who's going to be introducing to us the real sort of strategies and ideas we need to be getting in mind for dealing with the financial impact that the coronavirus is going to have on our school budgets. And one of the reasons why today's topic was so important for Paul and I to really support our community in is because there's a lot of school leaders fighting fires right now. And the types of fires are ranging from parents wanting reimbursements to extending the school year. And it's really crowding out a lot of bandwidth for senior leadership and governors to tackle the questions about what next. What are we going to do 6 months from now, 18 months from now? And, I really want Russell to help us understand where our mind needs to be for the next 6 to 18 months. And I also want to use this as an opportunity to impress upon our governors and our heads of school to really lean on our principals and deputies and other middle leaders in the school, both from the academic and non-academic side, because the fires that need to be fought today, we really need to empower that part of our school to address, and so that we can free up the time and space to prepare for the fires to come. And so, without further ado, I really want to get into that topic and get our mindset on the future of how we're going to manage these crises. And with that said, Russell Cooke is somebody that was introduced to me by a very good friend, who also managed through the 2008 financial crisis and spoke very highly of the work that Russell did. Russell has an extensive background in working with schools, both in mainland China, Singapore, and Europe. So for our audience today, it's actually quite representative of all those areas. So Russell, without further ado, can you give us a little bit of introduction to yourself and what we're going to be talking about today?
Yes, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be doing this webinar. I'm sure there's quite a lot of you are going through webinar fatigue at the moment. So I'm going to try and make this as exciting and as tantalizing as a financial management webinar can be. I may throw in a few jokes. I hope they translate, or I may not, depending on how we're going. So I grew up in the UK. My background is as a chartered accountant. So I started off with PricewaterhouseCoopers, or Price Waterhouse as it was then. Spent some time auditing and writing procedures, and a little bit of time in tax and a bit of time in insolvency, which is kind of gives you a bit of a background as to why things, when they go wrong, why they go wrong, which helps a little bit in the preparation for today. I crossed over into working into international schools in 2007 and have been involved with schools since then. Initially with the American School in Vienna, and then I've done some consultancy work with ISKL and the Anglo-American School in Moscow, and with Singapore American School, where I later became their director for HR director. Before moving on to be the business manager again at the American School in Guangzhou. I've now crossed back onto the dark side of consultancy, and which gives me plenty of time to prepare for things like this. So I'm going to start by taking you through the slides. That's kind of roughly what I do. What I have done, in preparing this slide deck, I've written quite extensive notes. So when we share out the slide deck after the webinar, you can actually read through what I've been saying, maybe not word for word, but there should be some good information there as resources, as opposed to just listening or re-watching the webinar. As a result, I'm going to be reading a little bit from it. So if you see my head go across from side to side, then that's the reason. So forgive me if there's any stiltedness in that. There's also going to be time for questions at the end. So feel free as I go through, if you have a question, to send it through on the text. Michael's going to be picking those up. So you may hear something and you may think, well, how do you do that? Or why would you do that? Or also, what I'm also cognizant of is that there's, if I look at the sign-up list, there's schools that are in Africa, there's some in Europe, a few in China, some in Central and South America. So it's quite a mixture of places. People will be facing with different scenarios at different times. At the moment, schools are opening back up in China. Some schools in Taipei haven't even closed. Schools in Europe are still closed and may open up over the next 2 or 3 weeks, or may not open up again in at the start of next semester. So without further ado, what today's topic is on is on financial management. But when you deal with financial management within schools, and particularly around the coronavirus responses, it's going to be a holistic response that you've got to give. You can't just do a straight monetary response to everything. When you're coming up with this, there's a lot of complexities, and they need to be fitted into a lot of different circumstances. So it needs careful prioritization. Again, and also with all of the systems that you may set up around financial management now that you haven't currently got in place, it's also got to be designed to support the staff and the school you have around you. It will also be under pressure anyway in the current environment. So adding in another level of complexity will not help them. The finance department is great at providing good, straight-talking, adept financial data-driven advice. But you've got to make sure you're dealing with this in a context of a school, which is in the current situation will be highly emotionally charged. So the way that you've got to do the right thing, but you have to do it in an understanding way. So what's fundamental is to be clear and consistent with your communications, be sympathetic, and when you're explaining why actions are taken, take time to explain why they are. The first thing to be able to sort of plan and reduce your levels of uncertainty is to try and guess what the future is going to be. And so at the moment, there's 3 scenarios that are mapped out here. There are these scenarios that have been adopted by a lot of management consultants companies. The first one is the first scenario is where the COVID virus is contained in the next 2 or 3 months. And the second one is more pessimistic, where there's physical distancing will go on, and there'll be other restrictive measures that go on in several regions for several months. And this is where the virus resurges again. At the moment, I think most people are hoping and leaning towards option 1, that there's going to be some rapid and effective control. But I think we need to be aware that the second option is, in some regions, will happen. So I think that's the second scenario. And the final scenario is where really government or the region that you're working, it doesn't get to grip, and public health response fails, and really you're stuck in a holding pattern of distant learning and schools being closed until really a vaccine is found. So, and it could go on into late 2020 until there's any return to the new normal. One of the things that I think will affect enrollment in particular is what I call persistence, where there's a virus contained. Even in the virus contained scenario, this may happen. And it's the persistence that students or parents will want to be in school or want to be in an online school. So if you have students that are currently been sent back or gone back to their home country with their families, and they're in online learning now, they may not be persistent. They may, when they're back in their home country, go back into education there. and take a year out, even though the father or the mother may travel back to do their job in September or October time. The child, the parents and the students don't want to persist with a online learning. So that this level of persistence certainly could affect that. And also at lower grades, parents won't want to persist having their preschool kids doing online learning. Let's wait till, they'll go through a scenario of saying, let's wait till schools start up again and there's normality where the kids can play together, or et cetera. And that might not just be preschool, that might go all the way to kindergarten. As I said at the start, each scenario and the timing of each scenario may play out differently to all of the different regions that we have around where people are tuning in from. Again, what it also means is that both for students and for faculty, there's going to be a continual need for support on social and emotional aspects. This is one thing that should not be put on, or we'll do it later. The check-ins and the resources that need to be made available for people should not be underestimated. If there is a resurgence in virus cases over the summer months, sort of option 2 or scenario 2, then what we'll be faced with as well is probably people who are saying they're going to be coming to school who won't be coming. So there's going to be a summer melt in some of your new students coming in, or some of your students coming back as well. So there's the longer that distance learning goes on or travel's restricted, this will be the things that determine your enrollment levels more and more. As schools come back, there could also be a rebalancing between schools in a town or a city or a region. What I mean by this is that parents who've gone through individual monetary issues over the last 9 months will want to look at the options that they have based on the new budget that they're personally faced with. They've got to make decisions about if they can afford their child to go to a certain school or if they can't. So that kind of, they may look at a cheaper school or a school which they perceive to be cheaper or better value for money, or they may look, because of the experience they've had with the school they're in now, a school which has got a reputation for a better online learning, which they've heard from their neighbor who say, well, they've gone to a competitive school. So it's worthwhile in the current scenario always being aware of what's happening at the competitive schools around you, how well they've dealt with it, how you manage your communications compared to theirs, position your school the way it should be and the way you've tried to position it in the past. So this is the implications of the scenarios on schools. So let's talk about the human resources aspect. And I'm just going to sort of run this off in a way which hopefully people can understand. Some of this is just lists of implications. Some there'll be some more discussions around. First of all, there needs to be clear instructions for faculty, your returning faculty that are coming back next year. There needs to be some clear instructions about travel over the summer. If you haven't already organized this, they need to be told they need to be back at school on time, or they'll, they're the engine room of the school. They're the most important people. They need to be here as school starts back up. If they're not around, they're contractually bound to be around. If they're away for the days at the start of school year because they decided to travel, then you need to tell them that they'll either have paid docked, or if it's away for a long period of time, they actually may face their contract being cancelled. And that's, I think people would get that. It needs to be explained in a way so they understand they do. I'm giving you the fast version now. It needs to be a more softened version. It needs to come in a consistent message from the head of school. Certainly that's one aspect. New faculty coming on board will be looking for assurances about their contracts, and depending on how your enrollment is going, there's no short answer to this in terms of what advice you can give them. And maybe we can talk a bit about one of the things as well is that some schools may be facing a better enrollment than last year. Some may be facing lower, some slightly lower, a lot lower, or critical enrollment levels. So depending on what scenario you're facing, it means that you'll have to talk to faculty in different ways, particularly those that are coming in. Now, not guaranteeing or not being able to guarantee faculty coming in may cause some issues around reputational damage. With your departing faculty, you may have to help if they're moving. They would normally have gone home in the summer and then gone to their new school. They may not be able to go home. They may just be looking to move to their new school. They may not get there. But you have to be clear about what you can provide your faculty, your departing faculty, in terms of accommodation and when they have to leave. If there's any additional, speak to your healthcare provider, health insurance provider about maybe extending insurance cover for them. They should cover the costs themselves. So there's a fair bit there to think about. Okay, next thing. Again, that's the personnel side. Again, one of the things we'll be talking about is in certain meetings will be staff which aren't required. Now, this staff that, there may be some that you may want to send on a sabbatical for 6 months. It may be on a lower rate. Teaching assistants may be one of those areas you can do that with. But athletic trainers, if you're not running an athletics program, these are the people you have to identify that you don't need on campus. So start to identify those as well. I'll talk a bit more about the how of identifying those later. There's going to be infrastructure issues as well when we move back as a result of the current crisis. So students will coming back onto campus. There'll be a need to keep those healthy and physically distanced, and that will be different in each country, but it will cause a lot of disruption. Whether it means wearing masks all the time for students and faculty, getting tests on before school starts and on regular basis. There's going to be some disruption there, but that will be prescribed by the government that you're under. So it's the Chinese government, the German government. They will tell you what's required. But what you need to be doing at the same time is also having the conversations with the education departments and the health and safety departments, the people that you know and work with, to say, I know that because the rules they're writing will be for Chinese schools or for German schools, not necessarily for international schools. So that you can have the conversations and be confident of taking the leeway that you may need to take in enforcing them. So there may be some area around that. So beware that your outsourced services are going to be seriously disrupted. Your cleaning will need to do more cleaning. There'll be some impact on how you do your bus services, and your catering company, depending on who they are, will struggle as well. So there's a lot of implications with outsourced services. A lot of you, until you get everybody back on campus, you're going to have if you've got dormitories and boarding facilities, these will also be empty. And when they come back on, there'll be structures that you have to set up around those. So if I move on now to the finance side. So just speaking generally, every school probably on this webinar has got pressure on their budget. You're going to have, for those students that aren't in your country now, you're probably going to struggle to have those back in when school starts up in the fall. Students probably won't be able to travel, and those students that are in country, the parents of those students may be under some financial pressure. They may have lost their jobs or job. If they're running their own company, it may have stopped trading or may have to pause trading. As a school, any of your ancillary revenues may reduce. Government grants from the US probably going down, or other areas, local grants. Interest income, if you have bank deposits, interest income is going to drop off. Again, your fundraising will be challenged, but again, don't stop fundraising. Don't stop your annual fund work. And the processes around there. But what you'll find is you'll get fatigue around that as a lot of good causes come into play, and everybody wants a little piece of everybody's goodwill. So there will be attrition generally to your enrollment. There would be probably about a 10% cash surplus on your budget. So you should budget you budget to finish up with 10% more money at the end of the year than you did at the start. So a lot of schools would budget around that, depending on where you are in your life. If you're a new school which has been established for a couple of years, and you're trying to grow your enrollment, your enrollment growth may now have to be completely revised. And you may struggle you may have budgeted for break even next year, and you may be faced with even worse. So schools will be facing somewhere, if costs remain stable, somewhere between a 10 or up to 10% deficits or higher in their cash, which is what they have to plan for. Okay, so.
Russell, something that comes to mind, because you've mentioned it here in the first half of our presentation, and knowing that we have 15 minutes left of presentation before we open it up for question and answer, I kind of want to get into people's heads that we're talking about a lot of things that really get to the heart of people's insecurities. This idea of reduced finances, the question of, you know, how do we decide which staff are mission critical as to which staff we can, I don't want to say dispose of, or in a way that we can relegate or perhaps outsource. There's this human element that a lot of people are going to be concerned with, that we need to take account into planning. Is there any particular advice as we go through this to help people just be mindful of the fact that, yeah, we are making some decisions that are going to have a huge impact on the lives of our community, and as we do that, these are some things I'd like you to be considering as you make those decisions?
Yeah. I think one of the things that, and I'll allude to this a bit more later on as I run through my slides, there's a lot of your decision making is driven by your mission and your vision and your values, and that's like an overarching thing. But there's also an element of treating people the way the way a school should treat people. There's a humanity about the current situation, is that no one wants to be in it, but we are, and let's try and do the best for everyone we have. The value of the situation, every person should feel valued in the situation, even at the end of the day, if their job may have to go away for a period of time or even permanently. So the way messages are delivered and the way that messages are collated together is important. Often with the school is in, people will worry about enrollment, and people will worry about their jobs as a result of enrollment. So it's important to make sure that there's transparency about where the school is in its enrollment as it goes into next year. If there's a perception that there's concerns around people's jobs, you know, this is so that people get it. This time of year, May, June, in a normal school year, people would have re-enrollment would have finished. Schools would be starting up, looking at finishing up their enrolling new students and estimating what kind of enrollment we're going to have next year. And it's no different this year, except that you may have been shut down for the last 3 months and no one has re-enrolled. And so the enrollment process is going to be a one-off different this year, and the collection of money next year is going to be different as well. But as enrollment goes over the next 2 or 3 months, becomes more and more certain, this is how you need to communicate that as the driver for revenue for the school and how its health is. And the communication around this should be reassuring and consistent. So that's the short advice I'd give for that.
Yeah, definitely. Because as you engage in this type of decision making, you realize it's going to have significant impacts, but people are going to be making their own sort of assumptions around it as well. And as we kind of move into the next stage of your presentation, which is really focusing on those cash flows, you raise these scenarios of now, May to July, and August to December. I just want to bring everybody's attention that within the next 10 to 15 minutes, as Russell now moves into the much more practical advice around managing cash flows and looking at leveraging your auditors and the outsourcing options you might have. Any questions that come to mind, please put them into the chat, and I'll begin queuing them up for you so that we can address them in approximately 15 minutes from now. With that said, Russell, please take it away and get into the meat of the topic.
Okay, yes. So I say most schools, as what we're doing now, most schools have already done the right thing. They've taken dramatic steps to keep their people safe. And they've also kept learning alive, which is great. There's probably some kind of crisis management team that the school already has set up. And within that crisis management team, you might call it something different. It might be your school, but it needs to involve the people. It needs to go from the top down. Into my hand. It needs to involve the board chair. It needs to involve the head of school. It should involve your legal counsel. These are and other. Particularly needs to be somebody in a communications role there, so that this team is working as a small, effective team, and with the business manager, of course, the head of finance and operations, somebody who's helping to bring good advice around the financial aspects. This team needs to be working along with other members of the school leadership team to get through this crisis. What you want to do is look at specific areas. So there's one area. Let's say that one area is enrollment. You want to devise a team which can really give you the certainty of information around your involvement. So it would involve people from the admissions office, but it's not just their responsibility. They may lead this team, but they need to have people. It might be teachers. It might also, it would probably be a principals or assistant principals that can help them find out really good information about who is coming back to school next year and how good are our forecasts really on enrollment. So you've got, and you may want to do it under the three scenarios of that I talked about earlier. How many people are going to be coming back if we start up again in September with everybody on campus by October, November time? How will we look like that? And how will we look like if everyone's back on campus in January, or if we're still going through this whole scenario for another 9 months? And that's going to be the driver for your income. So that team should be meeting regularly and reporting regularly to the crisis team. So that is the key thing to focus on now. Again, along with focusing on trying to think about where you can save costs. For next school year, I would suggest that we've got some cost savings around school travel, definitely. Professional development will have to change its paradigm if there's less travel. You probably will not be able to get any kind of international student sports trips, anything like that. So there's going to be some areas where you will be able to save money. Identify those now. And then from May and July onwards, you're going to be, that's what something you look at now. From May and July onwards, you're going to be looking for supporting students, financial resilience, the financial resilience of the school, and looking at the faculty and the staff as well, looking after them. The mental health issues won't go away over the summer for both faculty and students. So the school may be out of session, but it still needs to be monitored. And that's one way of, I'll go back to the I'll talk about enrollment again shortly. If you're calling up parents to ask them are you going to re-enroll next year, the conversation doesn't go like that. It's getting involved with them and asking them how they are and how their work is and how their life is. It's a long conversation, which is why you need a team to get it done. So, but that conversation will also bind your community to your school. It's got to be personal, one-to-one conversation. So you're striving for certainty wherever you can on the numbers you're trying to produce. Again, what the school also has to do, particularly in the finance area, is they've got to come up with cash flow models that enable the school to be able to analyze where they are. So you may have a budget that you did for next school year, which is how you presented to the board and how you're used to talking about costs, etc. But costs are interesting, but the important thing is cash. And if your budget and your cash flow forecast is based on an annual forecast, but your cash isn't coming in as it usually does, you need to rework your forecast to make sure that you've got flexible cash forecasts to be able to show the school where it is at any one point in time. And the development of useful, best fit cash forecast is also critical and needs to be started now if it hasn't been done already. So you may already have some which map on a macro level, but if you're struggling for cash, they need to be worked down on a more granular level. Okay, so towards the end of the year as well, I would say August to December. Okay, well, in some schools, the educational program and the mission and the vision drives everything. The integrity of that is the thing which drives your decision making, and it's often kept central. So when you're looking at what decisions you're making, it goes back to Michael's question around, well, who do we need to say no to? And go back to your mission, your vision. Are you going to be able to do it if you don't have this person, or is this going to affect who we are as a school? So often the quality and the appropriate number of faculty and staff is critical to the mission and the vision of the school. That being said, you have to be able to seize opportunities to try and find times to make necessary cuts. So it's going to need positive, proactive leadership in this time. For the people in the school community, you're going to have to. Each person's circumstances are going to be different within your parents, within your students, and your faculty and staff. Okay, so for next year, what you should also, within the program aspects of coming back to school next year, one of the things that you may want to introduce is things like zero-based budgeting for the following school year, reassessing budgets for the year coming up, getting people involved with that on the educational side. It's only going to be about 6 or 7% of your budget total spend. There's not going to be a lot of money in there, but the rigor of doing this will make people aware that the school is moving along differently to how it has been in the past. It will develop habits of good financial control. With regards to the finances, when you're working with when you made assumptions on how you're going to be collecting tuition next year, then tuition will be collected differently. So again, one of the teams that comes out of your crisis management is going to be a team focused on collecting money. And this team needs to work well together. Normally, probably the least paid and the least, the least authority in the finance department is the person who collects the money for the school, reaching out to parents saying, why haven't you paid this bill? This person alone won't get your cash in. So it needs to be a wider group on how to get your bills paid, speaking to organizations that should be paying them and getting that money in the door. Salaries and benefits may need to be frozen or minimized. And again, the conversations around that should involve staff and faculty as well, for the purpose of, as you go through the discussions, getting the collaborative approach on that will make the delivery of a bad message easier. just, okay. I'm going to talk about cash management. Manage your cash outflows. I say this is, there's a lot to be said for not paying any bills and buying a big dog. But on a more professional level, just make sure you're paying things as slowly as you can. Ask for forbearance on some things. If you're renting your property, speak to the landlord and say, look, can we change the rental payments? Go through all those conversations. Certainly do that early now before you get into trouble as an option. Secondly, take professional advice. If you're going to do cash flows and you've never done a cash flow before, but you've got a school auditor or you've got somebody you can reach out to help you with that, reach out to them. Get professional advice on how to do these things. Again, manage your cash inflows. I talked earlier about getting teams together to support the accounts receivable clerk. That's important too. Be in communication with your major organizations, the consulates, the embassies, to get ahead of what their circumstances are. They may be struggling for funding as well. You may be relying on an embassy paying you, but they may not have the money out of the US or wherever country they're coming from. You've got to be able to provide flexibility for your tuition payments. So try and drive that with the surety of getting them. Besides, okay. The next thing to do is access government-backed support. Now, in some countries, there's going to be quite a lot of support for schools and organizations generally, as your support staff may come under some umbrella scheme. And these are the kind of countries which have also at the same time probably got quite restrictive practices on letting staff go. So they normally go hand in hand. So if you haven't, then you're in a difficult situation. But a lot of countries in Europe definitely provide support for schools, and you've got to get into that support network. Contact your bank and your finance providers. They need to know where you are as a school. You may need to borrow short-term money. You may need to borrow a year's worth of operating money. They will want assurances from you for that. But start having those, get the cash flow model done and have those conversations. Certainly borrowing money at the moment is fairly cheap. There's also government supported loans. If your government is doing that for business, coronavirus business interruption loans, get involved with that. Natural fee, and your cash flow forecast is something which you should have open, or the person who's supporting the crisis team with cash flow information. This is the thing that should be driving a lot of decision making. Okay. One of the things that I just highlighted extra, which I want to just go through, is financial aid. The schools may not have had financial aid in the past. You may want to introduce it. You may want to introduce it in a way which is just set up for 1 or 2 school years. And the idea is to avoid attrition. People that are just getting over a tough time but need some help for a year. If you have got it, budget more for it. Set it for a specific period. And when you're assessing it, I would say that it needs to be run by a small committee of 1 or 2 people, maybe the head of school and the business manager, or just the business manager. It doesn't need to be run through it shouldn't be run through the school board. It needs to be confidential. It needs to be easy to do, but it needs to be robust as well. So if you haven't got one, think about setting it up with those criteria. Make sure you interview people, and also check where they live. If they live in a nice big house with a boat, they might not need it after all. Facilities building projects. Again, if you're looking at if you're really struggling for money, defer your maintenance projects. Not anything that's anything to do with, unless it's health and safety, don't do it. If you've got construction and you're thinking of doing it, and you can pull out of it, don't do it. There might be some penalties to pay, stop it. If you've got your school funding set up so that your capital fund will support your building and your support the plans you have for either smaller or larger construction, then go ahead with it. And if you need to use some of those funds elsewhere, and you're sure that it will make a difference to your school, if you're building to improve the school or increase enrollment later, and you think that's still going to happen, then continue with the project. Because even if you need to borrow money to borrow at the moment is cheap if the building is going to be used. Now, if you're building to, some construction where they're building to build blocks of flats in areas where it's just not going to recover in the next 5 years, there's no point building them. But a school, there's probably a lot of value for still doing. You may have to renegotiate some things, rephase it, but if there's money, if you've got other money to support it, do it as well. I'm going to skip over the response framework because there's it's just basically some ideas about how you should address each thing that you're addressed within a crisis situation. I'm just going to move on quickly now onto fraud. I don't know if you've seen it within your specific countries. If you haven't, then you should be aware of it. During the COVID-19 scenarios or situation at the moment, there's a lot of different types of fraud that are going on. Some schools may already be used to it. Procurement fraud, buy our fantastic masks online now. Maybe check your sources on that. There's also some mandate or chief executive fraud where there's phishing mails asking people, pretending to be the head of school, saying, pay this to help us with the coronavirus stuff. Beware of those beware of that. Staff need to be aware of increased levels of phishing mails. In some countries, obtaining bank details is easy and may lead to fraud, so be careful how you do that. What you also need to avoid is with the change in circumstances about how you're collecting money different to previous school years, that there's not a phishing mail sent out with a different bank account. And finally, I would just say that make sure all faculty staff are aware of their password protection protocols at school, and don't use school passwords on for private purposes, because if your school email gets hacked, then all of the above frauds are much easier to perpetrate. Finally, other implications. On a finance level, most schools finish up sometime in the summer and organize their annual audit. Now, in social distancing times, et cetera, or other implications, it might be more difficult to get your audit done on time, which might have some implications on your general meetings and et cetera, but that's not a big deal because people could understand that. What I would say is that if your bank is lending you money based on your audited accounts and you cannot produce them because you haven't had them done, then that will lead to problems around bank lending and liquidity. So be on top of just how and when your audit is going to get done. Again, keep on top of, I'm sure everybody's getting overdosed on news. Anyway, keep on top of your news, your network. And finally, be aware of what transitional risk. You've got members of your crisis team now that are just used to how the schools run, and they're leaving in a few weeks' time. And so you've got to be able to transition their knowledge of how the crisis has been run to the new people coming in. Also be aware that someone might not be coming in. So if you've got a head of IT who's leaving, then that might be an issue around your online learning. Or if you've got a head of school that's leaving, that's been leading up the whole process. There's a whole lot of transitional risk that you need to be managing now. Okay. So that's it. I'm only 20 minutes late.
All right. No, but I mean, there's a lot to consider, and you obviously took a very considerate and holistic approach to it, and that is very much appreciated because this isn't just about numbers. This is also about people. Russell, in terms of the questions that I'm seeing, there's really two themes in these questions. One theme is basically, hey, we have families, how can we help them? Either through financial aid. There's the other family component too that, hey, if we have to continue delivering the curriculum through an online medium, people are going to expect us to basically be charging less, which is kind of unfair to say because the cost of the teacher stays the same. So it's balancing between, hey, how do we help families that need the aid, understanding there also might be this pressure to reduce tuition. Just to address that first one, where can schools go to for, to strengthen or to make that cash flow accessible to help either the families that are struggling or potentially reduce tuition if the most pessimistic outcome continues and we're doing online learning into 2021?
Yeah, I think online learning in 2021 is at the start is a strong possibility, even if it's just some of your current faculty that haven't made it to your school, delivering some lessons to students in your classrooms on your campus online because they just can't get there. That may well be a scenario. So there's going to be some element of teaching online in that respect. If online learning is going to go on for a considerable period of time, you may need to be borrowing more money until your enrollment comes back up. And that's the element of assessing the impact on your school. I don't know if that analogy was useful or not.
Well, I mean, it does speak to the fact that we're having to change our business model, and therefore, do we have to change the pricing model, right? Because I think a lot of parents are saying, well, hey, this is not what I originally paid for. I'm looking for, and so therefore I want to pay, commensurate with what I'm getting.
Yeah.
So at the same time, the cost of our teachers are the same. Is it fair to say that the only solution, because you brought it up earlier in the presentation, borrowing, banks, or potentially...
Well, you have to change the business structure of the school, because online learning works in a scenario where you've got, let's say, 200 people sign up for an online MBA. It's being taught by one person, and the cost is spread out over several people. The cost structures in the school haven't changed, or can change slightly, but you're still paying for a physical plant. You're paying for faculty to be in country. And that you wouldn't want to change, because when schools start up again, that's what you want. But in the meantime, you need to be able to manage that your online program is better than anybody else around you. And it might be something that you lean towards developing in a different way going forward. Harrow School in the UK, for its sixth form, does overseas online. You can graduate from Harrow School in London on their online program. And I think it's run by Pearson Education. It's outsourced to Pearson Education. But they've taken the step of moving towards an online element to their product portfolio. So I don't think that typical kindergarten to grade 12 schools will have an online school that it can post online for kindergarten students, but a school in Singapore or even in China could run online enrollment for people who are outside the country, and therefore develop an expertise in an online school. Okay, so that's a bit further down the line and past. But this is when you're planning solutions for now, you want to be thinking 2 steps down the line as well. This will come back again. The virus won't go away. Another virus will come. So if you've already got an online program set up, and it's a great online program, which is not just run on a couple of different platforms, but actually has got a lot of interactive resources that the school has invested money in, then when something like this comes back, it just leverages on that for a short period again, and then goes back to the standard model of kids on campus, enriched learning, and personal relationships.
So a couple of solutions that you talked about throughout the presentation, I want to paraphrase and see if they come into this question, is that if we're looking to either, number one, help parents that have financial uncertainty and might be, have to address late payments or looking for tuition reduction, and that tuition reduction can either be in response to their own financial distress or because they want it to be commensurate with the product they're getting. We are looking, you had brought up the topic of borrowing, and there's also this idea of adjusting our business model in terms of, during these periods of online learning, how do we make it much more financially viable in terms of the resources that we're using? Would that be correct? So those are
I think what you've got with the request for repayments of tuition, I think the school and the school board have to be very firm and stand together and say our costs haven't changed for this school year, and that's just not a discussion point. But you say it nice, and I just said it. With the parents with financial concerns, and you've got to look at financial aid as a way to avoid attrition. And the conversations about re-enrollment, the personal conversations there and understanding people's situations will mean that you're able to judge, okay, we might need this level of financial aid. And then you go out and talk to people about that. So budget for it and budget the amount of cash that you will need for that, or the amount of tuition you're going to give up for that, and how that will affect your cash. And even if you do all of that, some people may still not, if you gave somebody a 50% reduction in financial aid because of their financial situation, that kind of gesture binds them to the school. So if they've got kids in grade 2, then they'll probably continue to be there because they've got that loyalty. It's developing the community of the school.
Yeah, so find a way
you've got to do that with a financial model behind it.
Yeah, so find a way to invest in those relationships to keep them there for the long term. Another question that kind of moves away now from tuition is about staffing and schools that are thinking about cutting salaries or in a way rationalizing salaries differently so that they can make better use of their cash resources. One of the questions that came in actually used the example of, can we actually have a difference in salary based on, say, a single teacher with no kids versus a teaching couple with kids? Is there precedent for having different packages?
I would say no. I would say it'd be a difficult one to justify and manage doing the same job. And if you hire people with different dependencies, etc., but I would say around adjusting salary based on other benefits, no. If you're looking to adjust faculty salaries and staff, there may be a discussion around depending on where you are with your enrollment and your costs. Involve a group of faculty in the discussion process so that any change that you make is collaborative.
Yeah,
that's because it's going to be specific for a lot of schools will have from this webinar today. A lot of schools have got a lot of different scenarios and certainly slightly different problems. My email address is up there. I'm quite happy to answer questions if people have them, or get on a call with them and talk them through individual issues. I think that's the easiest way to resolve those.
Yeah. And then one last final question. It kind of comes back to the financial aid. If you were to begin looking at financial aid, what does that process look like to ensure it's fair? Who would you want involved, and what would be the process for not only taking in applications, but validating legitimacy of the requests?
I think, again, keep it simple, as rigorous as possible, not just looking at income, but looking at assets. Involve an interview and do some social media checking and look where they live. It should involve the business ideally just the business manager. It needs to be confidential. It should not involve the board. It should, if board members are looking at financial aid, there's a conflict there. There's a conflict if board members are involved or looking for financial aid. So keep it simple. One person, maybe the board, maybe the head of school and the business manager.
All right. So I want to thank you, Russell, for really sharing your experience with us today, because I know it's very reflective of the various crises that you've helped schools through the variety of not just pandemics, but financial crisis stemming all the way back to 2008. I want to appreciate everybody's time and attention for today. This recording will be sent to you along with a transcript of those questions, so you get a better idea about your colleagues and peers, what they were asking. Just a final note is, do not go about this yourself. Really lean on your middle leaders, lean on your specialists in the different departments that you have to really provide the data that you need. And that, like Russell said, goes down to even the person that has to collect the tuition from month to month. What is he or she hearing? What types of difficulties are they having? What sort of feedback on the ground do they have? And how does that play into your long-term planning? Because ultimately, we need to lean on those middle leaders and those specialists to get us through these current fires so we can plan for the fires to come. From the School Governance Network, thank you so much for participating today. I really look forward to inviting you to future sessions. And if there's any topics in particular you would like, please email us and we will happily entertain them. Have a great week and good luck with the completion of your school year. Bye-bye for now. Thank you again, Russell.
Thanks.